Welcome back to another edition of the West of the Rest podcast. My name is Blair Angulo. I am joined by the national recruiting editor at 24/7 Sports, Mr. Brandon Huffman. This is episode number 8, season 3, West of the Rest podcast. The people are calling you, Huff. They want to know that we're a couple minutes late. We've been going live on X. We've been going live on other platforms, and I think you just got a phone call saying, "Hey, where are you?"
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where I pulled one of those moves where failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and I clicked the wrong button. Okay, there we go. We're live. What's up, everybody? We're live now. I was going live on the wrong Twitter account, so my bad.
Hey man, we're getting old. I think this is a clear indication of that. Like
It's
I said,
West, for everybody, right?
like I said, West of the Rest podcast. We're going to get into some recruiting. I did want to start the conversation though, Huff, with the fact that we are now in playoff season in the world of high school football. I went out to the opener in CIF Southern Section. I think it was Division III. Inglewood versus Capistrano Valley. We'll get into the highlights or maybe the standouts a little bit later on in the show. We're going to go into our recruiting updates of the week and look ahead to what looks like a pretty big recruiting weekend. But I wanted to start off with maybe something that's a bit more behind the curtain, right? Or maybe we're kind of trying to tell people how things are made behind the scenes. And, for the most part, you and I, we go out to games or we go out to showcases or camps, events, whatever it may be, whether it's the season or the off season. I guess there's really no off season anymore in the world of college football recruiting, but it's always interesting in this time of the year. It gets a little dicey because you go out to a game thinking, oh, I need to talk to this recruit, or I need to get this quote from this guy, or I need to ask this question because this is the hot topic right now. But with the postseason, it's win or go home. Sometimes these players lose. Sometimes the season's over, and sometimes the tears begin to flow, Huff. So the last thing I want to do while a kid is bawling his eyes out, basically knowing that he has just played his last high school football game with his buddies and the world is now becoming very, very real. Last thing I want to do is go ask him, hey, what's your recruitment looking like? So it's definitely an interesting time this part of the year, this part of the season, when we're trying to get information, but sometimes there's some roadblocks in terms of being able to get that information.
Yeah, and it was a lot more difficult, 5-10 years ago when guys were actually depressed and disappointed that their season came to an end, not running to Twitter. I texted you, Blair, on Friday night. I was not at a playoff game. I was at a regular season game as the state of Arizona was wrapping up the regular season schedule. But I think we had a new record from loss of the game to a tweet of a personal highlight. It was less than 10 minutes after a game after a game concluded where I saw a tweet of a player tweeting their highlight that happened in a game that they lost just 10 minutes before. So, again, I mean, you do have a lot of guys that are bummed, a lot of guys that are disappointed. But, and this is something that would be a deeper discussion for another day, with the transient nature of high school football, where it's like in college, is there still that tie to that school emotionally like there used to be? If you're at your third or fourth school, do you really feel bummed that your season's over? And now you're like, hey, I'm this much closer to getting to play college ball. And I've noticed that a lot more often the tears come from the guys that do realize this is their last football game ever, and the reality and the finality of that. But it does, I don't want to go up and ask a kid, hey, I'm sorry about your season coming to an end, so where are you visiting this weekend? I'll just slide in their DMs like normal people.
Yeah. I was not expecting that last line. I think what's interesting for me is that you get to see some of these players and whether or not they care, because I think for the most part, the ones that care actually turn out to be something, right? Or they actually become captains at the next level, or they're very productive in college, or that you won't need to really kind of squeeze them to be able to be motivated, or they have the care and they have the work ethic to strive at the next level. So it kind of reminds me about a decade ago, I want to say, maybe 8 or 9 years. I went out to see Byron Murphy. It was Saguaro versus Centennial. I think it was in Peoria, and this was week 2 of the season. Saguaro at the time, I think, was playing up 2 divisions. They were that good, that talented. Program that produced a player like Christian Kirk and Byron Murphy being one of them. I think they were on a 26, 27 game win streak. They hadn't lost in over 2 seasons. They had just won back-to-back state championships. Byron Murphy, this is week 2, and he is inconsolable because they just lost to a Centennial team that had twice as many players on their sideline from a sheer body, and obviously the enrollment is on a different scale at Centennial, and seeing Byron Murphy, they lose this game by less than a touchdown, and he's bawling his eyes out, and it was week 2 of the season, right? And I'm there to interview him about USC and Notre Dame and Washington and Texas A&M and a few other schools, and it was a kind of a reflection of, okay, this guy cares, right? This guy at the next level will care. And when he's in the huddle, he'll be coachable. And when he's in the weight room, he's going to be coachable. And when when there's some adversity that hits, this is a guy that you can bet on. So when you're trying to figure out Byron Murphy, is he a low 4-star? Is he a 3-star? Is he a high 4-star? Could he potentially be a 5-star? I mean, he's still in the NFL now, and I think on his 2nd or 3rd contract, former 2nd-round draft pick out of Washington. Those are some of the intangibles and some of the things that you look for, because you know that you have nothing to worry about with a player like him who cares so much that, again, on week 2 of his high school football season, lost a heartbreaker to a team that had way more players and probably was way more talented. And yet here he is bawling his eyes out because he wanted to go perfect on the season.
I have one a few years before that when the old state championship bowl games were played at the Home Depot Center in California. Everybody remembers that vaunted 2009 Sarah receiver core that had Robert Woods and George Farmer and Paul Richardson. And their 4th receiver was a guy who was an elite safety named Marquise Lee. Well, the next year, Robert Woods is off to USC. Marquise has this breakout season where, he was the number 2 safety in the country, but he wanted to play receiver. Sarah was like on the road to win their 2nd straight state championship. And they got beat at that time by a Folsom team that wasn't with the Folsom that we know now. That was the one that kind of really took to it. And I mean, Folsom beat the hell out of Sarah in that game. And I remember there was a couple of players on that team that were committed at the time that didn't want to do interviews. This was probably a 30-point loss for Sarah in the pouring rain in the state championship game. And I'd said to Marquise before, hey, man, he hadn't made a commitment yet. He wasn't going to announce. This is in the old days, guys, when people didn't announce until February, the first Wednesday. And we're in December, and he was going to take those visits. And I'm like, hey, win or lose after this game, let's get that interview. He said, absolutely. And he stuck around, through all the tears and all the post game. He comes up, he said, hey, so I promised you that interview. Do you want to still do that interview? I'm like, do you still want to do that interview? He's like, I'm a man of my word. No surprise, the guy goes on to win the Bolitnikoff Award a couple of years later, has an All-American career at USC. But again, some of these guys, they understand the long game. They understand the big game. And, it wasn't the most exciting interview in the world. He just lost a state championship in what was his breakout senior season. But that told me a lot about him as a player. And I remember, a few weeks later, we were hosting the signing day show on the old Fox Sports Prime Ticket, and he was announcing his decision on there. And that was just one thing where, I kind of pointed it out on the show, and he said, hey, if I tell someone I'm going to do something, doesn't matter the result, I'm going to still do it. And that always stuck with me. And so guys can learn a lot from some of the veterans in the game that, knew how to handle a loss, but also knew that there's those obligations. We see it every year with the tournament, the NCAA tournament. We see it with bowl games. It's hard. And some guys don't want to talk. Some guys want to give it no comment. And then others, just like, yeah, miss me with all that. So, it's what you do in the down times, that I think says a lot about a person.
Look at us yelling at clouds. Let's look ahead to this week, Huff, with our first segment. There are a number of notable visitors and players juggling playoff games and whether or not their season will continue, going to sleep and then scrambling to the airport. Whether or not their flight gets canceled, that's another thing. But they're going to start hitting the road, and you have a number of high-profile visitors making it out to SEC country.
It's going to be a very fascinating weekend with Alabama hosting Oklahoma. Last week Alabama had a few guys that came in for that LSU game, but this week they've got the number one player in the state of Arizona coming in Jake Hildebrand. They've also got Mikael Davis, who is a top 5 player in the state of Arizona, coming in. And then that's big. Alabama just hosted Jackson Roper, who's the number one player in the state of Colorado for 2027. Now they get Hildebrand to come out. So it's a big game for Alabama. And it's funny because, Alabama at LSU last week, which it's a different LSU team, but there's still that energy when they play. Well, now you got an Oklahoma team that beat Alabama last year on the road. And Alabama's trying to continue to show that last year was a fluke. And so there's going to be some energy there. And that's a great opportunity for a guy like Jake Hildebrand to go, who was actually supposed to go last weekend for the LSU game, but decided to push it back a week. So another good opportunity for Alabama to continue to make waves with the West Coast recruits. They did a really good job with Jackson Roper last weekend, and now they've got Hildebrand coming in this weekend. So that's back-to-back weeks where you can get a really good offensive tackle. I was at the game earlier in the year when Basha played against Orange Lutheran, and Orange Lutheran had an offensive lineman of their own already committed to Alabama and Sam Utu. Courtney Morgan, the general manager for Bama, was out at that game, and so they've been on Hildebrand for a while. So that'll be a big visit. And then Davis as well, going out there to the game this weekend. So some big games for the Tide. It's just good to see Alabama gets to play in a high-profile game for the first time in a while.
I have some trivia for you, Huff. Speaking
Sure.
of Alabama, we were driving. Me and my wife were driving somewhere, and we had talked about this part of the show, of the trivia portion, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of like Stump the Schwab, right? Like I try to bring something up to Huff to see if he has the answer, and so we were trying to think of like what the appropriate term would be for this segment, and she said something like. She said Tuffy for Huffy, which was a good one.
I like.
But I was like, well, what about Tough for Huff? Or she said Tough Juan for Tough Juan for Juan. That one was good. But yeah, this is this is a tough for Huff. So speaking of players from Arizona that are going to Tuscaloosa this weekend, I want to ask you, how many players from the Grand Canyon State in the modern recruiting era have ever signed with Alabama?
Okay. So I'm going to count Noah Carter because while he technically signed with Washington, he didn't go into the portal. So he signed a new, although it was an NLI, it was a intent to enroll. So I'm going to count him, even though.
So that's a blurry one. Yeah, that's a blurry one because he technically signed with Washington.
Judges, what do you say? Yes. Okay. They'll allow it.
DeBoer leaves Seattle for Tuscaloosa, and he brings along players like Noah Carter, Austin Mack, yada, yada, yada.
I'm going to say there was a JUCO player they had. God, back when Arizona still had JUCO football, maybe from like Glendale College or Arizona Western. I want to say it was like a defensive lineman. I could be wrong.
You're breaking the code because I didn't do JUCO research. I did just high school research.
Who is the high schooler? Gosh, I can't think of anybody.
None. Ever.
So Noah Carter would be the first technically true freshman from.
And that one is blurry.
Very blurry.
And so that one is a give or take. The judges said give, so we'll give it to you. But before Noah Carter and after Noah Carter, there have been 0 players from the state of Arizona to ever sign with Alabama. Now, I think that's going to change because there's so much talent in the state of Arizona. And then obviously if DeBoer is there for a long time, and with Courtney Morgan, the general manager, and his connections up and down the West Coast, you just figure that at some point they're going to land someone.
Yeah. Here's one you covered. Ralph Hamzen just drops in the chat. Almost got Brock Purdy.
They almost got Brock Purdy. So Brock Purdy took an official visit to Alabama. Remember, Nick Saban there late in the cycle was trying to pull in who at the time was going to be named the Gatorade State Player of the Year. So everyone, remembers Brock Purdy as maybe this unheralded or overlooked or, maybe kind of an underdog type of prospect. But I mean, Nick Saban was after him, right? Like Alabama had offered him and gone all in on Brock Purdy before he decided to sign and play at Iowa State. But
So
before then, there's been none. In the research that I did, and I feel like I do pretty good research.
what's crazy, if you go back to that class, that was, if I remember right, they kind of went after Brock Purdy when Brevin White turned him down right before that to stick with Princeton. And Brevin's brother at the time, Brady, was like, I want to say at ASU, might have already been at Memphis by then, but Brevin spurned Alabama to stick with Princeton, because I remember we were at the Poly Bowl that week. And so Brock looked like he was visiting late that year. And the quarterback, here's the crazy trivia. The quarterback that they ended up signing is a guy who goes by the name, he's a dual threat quarterback by the name of Lane Hatcher.
Never heard of him.
That's exactly. Now, in that quarterback class's defense, and Brock obviously made the right decision. Brevin got a degree from Princeton. The year before, that same Alabama program signed a young man by the name of Mac Jones as their second quarterback, because they had a young man by the name of Tua Tagovailoa, who they got because their original quarterback commit, a guy by the name of Jake Fromm, flipped to Georgia. So the 2018 class was probably one of those like, hey, the reality is you're going to be dead.
Yeah. No, and that kind of brings me back to the original point is we are starting to see different pockets of the country reach into different parts of the country from a college standpoint, right? Like, how many times have we ever discussed Arizona prospects going out on a visit to Alabama, right?
Yeah.
And maybe those players even being good enough or being on the level of being recruited by the caliber of an Alabama. And here we are talking about multiple guys going out to a game, and they're going to be right in the thick of it if they want to be, right? Like if Alabama wants to be involved and they want to be in the picture for a Jake Hildebrand, for a Michael Davis, they're going to be right there. So it's an interesting time. Obviously, it's kind of the reason why we began this show and this podcast to begin with. But I think like these are the types of weekends that begin to start to set the table for what we see in the spring and in the summer. And when an Alabama ends up signing a player like a Jake Hildebrand, these are the types of weekends that kind of allow that to happen down the road. I'm also monitoring some visits, Huff, 3 of them in particular. Texas A&M has been really active at the receiver position out west, right? When you get a Jerome Miles, the only 5-star in the 2025 cycle from the state of Utah last year. You get a Brandon Arrington who can play both ways. He's going to go and play corner in College Station, 5-star out of San Diego. You also have a Madden Williams in this recruiting class. Currently, he's probably the most productive player in the Trinity League at receiver in the last few years. And, you know, Bosco begins its CIF Southern Section push this week. They're going to get Quentin Hale on campus this weekend. And he's the number 1 rated wide receiver on the West Coast in the 2027 class. He recently named a top 7 or top 8 schools that he's really considering. And I think the A&M Aggies have a realistic shot to dig in and to reach into Southern California once again, because Quentin Hale is very interested in what they're doing. Number 3 in the rankings right now. They look like an offense that can move the football. We already know about the defense and kind of what Mike Elko does there on the defensive side of the ball, but the offense has been pretty explosive and putting up points when they need to. They've squeaked out some wins by having to score points, and they've done exactly that. So I think Quentin Hale will be keeping an eye on the Aggies. He'll be out in College Station this weekend. Dante Wright, the 4-star corner from Long Beach Poly, is headed to Georgia. Remember, he committed to the Bulldogs back in the late spring, early summer. And it's an important visit for the Dogs because he's been pretty open about taking other visits, listening to other suitors. USC in his own backyard is pushing really hard. Oregon is another school that has gotten him on campus this season. and the Ducks could never be discounted for any player in Southern California or the West region. And when that defensive staff, Tosh Lupoy, Dan Lanning, Coach Wadood, all those guys in that room, when they want a player, it's usually curtains for the other programs. So I think Dante Wright, a high priority for the Ducks. He gets out to Georgia this weekend, and I think it's a chance for the Bulldogs to reel him back in or to continue to convince him that playing in the SEC down in Athens is probably the best path for him. He was I think their second commitment in this 27 class, along with Gavin Honore, the receiver from Mater Dei. So 2 West Coasters going out to Georgia. I think this is going to be a big visit for the Bulldogs to try to get Dante Wright to continue to feel good about his early commitment. I know it's a long way to signing day for that 27 group, but this is an important weekend in that regard. And then the last one, top 24/7 safety, Gavin Williams from Damien High School out in Laverne. He's supposed to visit Washington this weekend. Now, Gavin has also been considering some of the heavy hitters, the blue blood programs that you would kind of hear about with any top tier prospect, the Oklahomas, the Ohio States, USC's. Ole Miss is involved as well. That they're doing a great job of recruiting him. But the Huskies just got Dylan Robinson in the last cycle, and Dylan Robinson being from Laverne, that would be an easy guy to kind of cling on to, right, Huff, and to, in a way, get under his wing and try to learn the ropes. And, it's always an issue or a thing that you look at with a player is leaving the state to try to get acclimated to a program. That would be an easy and comfortable transition for a Gavin Williams. I think the defense really entices him. He's a versatile safety that can do a little bit of everything. Taylor Mays, the safeties coach, Coach Richardson, who also works with the corners and the defensive backs. I think that's a nice little pairing there that makes it intriguing for Gavin Williams. So he's headed out to check out the Huskies, and that should be an important visit.
And who did the Huskies play? Purdue. And who was the defensive coordinator for Washington? And where was he the head coach last year? Purdue. And who's the linebackers coach for Washington? The brother of the head coach at Purdue. So this game is going to be an intriguing matchup for a number of storylines. And, it's the penultimate home game for the Huskies this year before they play Oregon Thanksgiving weekend. So a big weekend for them to make an impression before you get into that Thanksgiving weekend. And, obviously they did not have a great game at Wisconsin, but they get to come home to the friendly confines of Husky Stadium. And yeah, Gavin Williams is certainly a player that a lot of those West Coast schools, a lot of those national schools are going after. So a big weekend for the Huskies. Keep in mind that John Richardson is a Southern California native himself. And then you've got obviously Taylor Mays, who spent some time at USC. So will be very interesting to see if this weekend can really move the needle with Gavin Williams. As we start getting, we're winding down, but we've only got 3 more weeks of the regular season, which means that we're running out of weekends for guys to go on game day visits. And we're 3 weeks away from today, the early signing period beginning. And then we've got a whole month worth of tweets about I'm intending to enter the transfer portal in the month of January. So we're getting down to crunch time. But if you're a smart staff, you're a smart program, you're making sure those 2027s that come and visit these next 3 weekends really feel it, because you're kind of going to ignore them for a while as you're trying to manage your roster. You're trying to maintain who you're going to get in and out of the portal and finalizing that class. But this is a key 3-week period to get out and see those 2027s and get those 2027s onto campus, because schools are running out of time and opportunities to do that.
It's very important. It sets the table. And this is the groundwork that you lay to be able to start building the foundation of what that class is going to look like. And so when some of these schools start stacking commitment after commitment after commitment in April, in May, and obviously in June, when the finish line is so close, this 3-4 week period here at the end of the recruiting cycle is pivotal. It's crucial. It's the most important part. And this is why we're seeing so many players and recruits hitting the road and going out on visits and making sure that they're trying to gather as much information as possible on which schools they might take official visits to. So like you mentioned, 3 weeks until the early signing period. And then after that happens, I think we're going to get a clear understanding and a clear picture of which college players are going to go into the portal. Then the window opens January 2nd through the 16th. That's going to be I don't know what's the best word to describe what that's going to be. I mean, 2 weeks of mayhem.
Yeah.
Dude, think about the first 4 days of that and how quickly everyone's going to try to get the first official visit, lock in a player into a deal, make sure you get that player to sign or commit or whatever it may be. And then moving on to the next priority, next position, trying to figure out the numbers on your roster. And hey, by the way, if we don't get that first batch of recruit, how quickly do you move on to the next guy? If he doesn't commit on the spot, like there is no time to waste. And with only 2 weeks and with just the craziness of everything, that's why I think there's so many backdoor channel decisions being made now, right? So much communication in the month of December where everyone has to kind of lay the dominoes out and figure out the right combination of what this is going to look like, because 2 weeks, that might not be enough to be able to make everything happen and to get everything over the line. What I want is a kind of a decision day type of broadcast somewhere. Someone, like, I'm a big soccer guy, so I watch deadline day, like in the summer. There's a big deadline day broadcast that the BBC network puts on, and it's like yellow tabs everywhere. This is how much time's left until the window closes, and you've got reporters at every facility across the UK talking about, hey, like Manchester United is close to signing this guy, or the deal just fell through for this Crystal Palace center back. Like, I think we need something like that in the college football sense, because those last 24 hours of the portal window are going to be a madhouse.
And here's what's fascinating. Okay, so the portal opens on the 2nd. You've got 3 playoff games on January 1st. You've got a week, and then I think the first semifinal game is on January 8th. January 8th, which is Fiesta Bowl. And then January 9th, you've got the that would be the Peach Bowl. So imagine if you're a team that just played in one of the playoff games on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. So there's 4 bowl games. You're one of the 8 teams that are left.
If you're good enough to essentially handcuff yourself.
Exactly. You're basically, because you're successful, you're screwing your roster. You may have a guy that played for you in the bowl game on New Year's Day. Okay, maybe he played minimally, maybe he played a lot, but he also knows there might be a roadblock in playing anymore. And we saw this a couple of years ago. Malik Murphy had to make the decision: do I stay on the Texas roster as we head into the playoffs, knowing that Texas was going into the playoffs, but also knowing that he was the backup, one snap away from Quinn Ewers, or he had to think, take care of himself long term. And it's one of those situations now too where a lot of the voices that are not happy with the timing of this are the programs, the Kirby Smarts, the Ryan Days, who they expect to be in that playoff game. They expect to be in those semifinals. So now you're coming off the high of winning a Rose Bowl or winning a Sugar Bowl, but now you got to go back to campus and plead with the guy like, hey, man, I understand you want into the portal. I know the portal closes 3 days before you play for a national championship, but you came here to win a national championship. I mean, it's going to be absolutely mayhem, and you're going to have some of those guys. They're going to have to make that tough decision. Do I stay in the portal, or do I enter the portal, or do I stick it out and wait? And, I remember a situation 2 years ago talking with Dylan Morris, who at the time was the backup at University of Washington to Michael Penix. And Penix was graduating, and he knew that he was graduating. And Dylan Morris had a second year, or had a 6th year left, but there was all that buzz that Will Howard was going to be coming in to be the backup, or not Will Howard, Will Rogers was going to be the backup at Washington. So Dylan Morris was able to discuss with Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer, hey, I need to leave. You guys are bringing in a portal guy. I get it. I understand, but I don't want to leave until this season is over. And he stuck with Alabama, or I'm sorry, he stuck with Washington all the way through the national championship game, ended up at James Madison. Now he's a grad assistant at Alabama. It was one of those where, like, he had to time it right, but also knew, like, hey, we're one step away. If Penix gets hurt, I have to go in and be ready. So you're having guys, I mean, I can't say there's a right answer. It's not my life. It's not my future. I can see where coaches are upset, but I can also see where players have to make that decision. They've got to make that long-term plan. So that's why it just adds to, the enormity of how crazy January could get.
Especially now when everything is financial, right? Like you have to make business decisions at this point. And it's not just about, hey, like I need to just wear this, right? Or I need to at some point just figure it out, or I'll get my degree or whatever it may be. Now this is a real world situation now where you have to make these decisions. Hey friends, I want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation. This amazing organization was started in honor of a little girl named Avery who at just 6 years old was diagnosed with DIPG, the deadliest form of childhood brain cancer. The foundation is fighting for a cure by funding research, raising awareness, and supporting families facing this diagnosis. If you want to learn more and to get involved, head over to averystronggdipg.org. Huff, we teased it a little bit at the opening. You were at a game. It wasn't a playoff game, so I don't know if you saw tears. You probably didn't see tears. I was at a game. I also didn't see tears because I went to talk to the winning team, but there were probably tears on the other side. It was cold. It was foggy. It was out in Saddleback College in Mission Viejo, Capistrano Valley hosting Englewood, California. I want to talk about Miles Smith, the Englewood defensive lineman, high 3-star, probably a 4-star prospect, maybe has a potential if everything clicks in the offseason. If you test well, I mean, from an eye test standpoint, he looked like he has a lot of the boxes checked to be an elite type of player, maybe a top 50, top 75 overall in the nation. I mean, I was really impressed with his motor, with his hand usage, with his willingness to take on double teams all night. Now, there was a couple guys on the team telling him he was going to have to go play nose guard, and that's not an attractive position to play when you're one of the high caliber defensive linemen. You got to bounce off the center, and then here comes the second guy to come at you, and you have to fight those double teams to even make an impact on the play. And oh, by the way, if it's a run play, they're not running it up the middle because, oh, by the way, Miles Smith is right there, so there's no way you're ever going to get serious action. But I think I was impressed with just how quick he was off the snap, how he was able to dip underneath some of those blocks. I think his mobility, his flexibility, the way he moves and maneuvers was really special. Now, the interesting thing about that is that Englewood also has Elijah Harmon, who is a top 24/7 defensive lineman. He has offers from all over the country. I think Oklahoma right now is pushing the right buttons with him. Oregon is high on the list. USC is high on the list. But he's been hurt all year. He's had a leg injury to deal with. And so that's kind of allowed opposing teams to key in on Miles. And that hasn't really affected his production or his effort level or his motor or the way he goes about every drive to try to get to the quarterback or get to the football. So I was really impressed. This was my first ever exposure to him. I had never seen him I don't think he was on the camp circuit. I don't think he made it out to many showcases, if any, during his sophomore offseason. Now as a junior, what he's able to put on tape and what he's been able to show for Englewood, who is dealing with the loss of probably their best defensive prospect, I think it was really impressive stuff. I think he's got all the potential in the world. I remember I texted you and our guy Greg Biggins last year about Kari Wilder, right? And I saw Kari Wilder play Los Alamitos, I believe, and this was before he got all the big blue blood offers. But there's a lot of comparisons there from what I see in Miles Smith and kind of what we were able to see at Akari early in that recruiting cycle in 2026, because he's got these long arms where he's able to just keep blocks off of him. He sheds them with ease. And then he gets to the football. He doesn't give quarterbacks much time to even process things back there because he's up there or he's in the pocket right away. And then the other thing is he gets his hands up all the time. So he's disrupting passing lanes. I think he had 3 batted balls that I saw on Friday. And those are 3 plays that are essentially, washed because you have a guy that is so quick off the snap that is just going to be able to disrupt everything. So Miles Smith, remember the name. I know he's already rated. I know he's got a ton of offers, but I think his stock will continue to rise because he's been showing just how premium of a prospect he is, especially at a position, Huff, that we don't see a lot of Miles Smith out west,
right,
along the interior. I mean, who are some of the big NFL guys that we have even covered in the last decade plus? The Kenny Clarks of the world, the Brian Clark, Price was a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I know he was an edge rusher. Jalen Phillips was phenomenal last night.
Tuli Pulotu is another one,
awesome,
right? That's
Sunday night.
Yeah, he's been awesome. So, I mean, but like we're not, this isn't a long scroll that we're going down. So a player like Miles Smith doesn't come along very often in Southern California. So when he is there, we got to give him his flowers. So kudos to him. Inglewood moves on. They played this week. Man, I forget who they play, but they're looking good in Division III.
I was at a regular season finale, Williams Field of Gilbert, Arizona, against Brophy Prep of Phoenix. Devin Fitzgerald, who's the number 1 player in the state, was presented his All-American Bowl jersey for the 2026 Navy All-American Bowl. Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State head coach, was out. Jim Mahalchek, the offensive line coach at Michigan State, was there. It was a very intriguing game because these two teams have played some real thrillers. In fact, the first Arizona high school football game I had gone to in the last 5 years post-COVID was actually Williams Field against Brophy Prep. And it was one of those great games, Blair, where I knew I wanted to move to Arizona at some point because it was in November. It was 80 degrees at kickoff and I didn't have to wear a hoodie. But also I got to see Kyler Casper against Ben Morrison in one of those best on best games where Kyler Casper had 2 touchdowns. Ben Morrison had a pick and a pass breakup, and you got to see the best against the best. In this particular game, you got to see, the offensive line for Williams Field is very talented. Colin Campbell, who's committed to Michigan State, was there with Mahalchek watching him. Malachi Joyner, who's head of the University of Arizona, also on that line. And then Omar Kaba, who I really like out of Williams Field, is going to Idaho, played there. And then they also had Trey Smith, MJ Glenn. Trey Smith had like a 99-yard kickoff return, 4-touchdown. MJ Glenn is a 2027 linebacker. And then obviously Brophy had Devin Fitzgerald, who they did a good job of kind of keeping the ball away from, which allowed Donovan McNabb Jr. to have a breakout game himself. Dalen Sharper was back. Case Vandenbosch is headed to the Air Force Academy to run the option. And then there's some young talent there at Brophy Prep. So both those teams ended up making the playoffs. You get to that point in the season where you don't want to go see the same teams over and over again. So I kind of kept my distance from the Chandler game, which turned out to be an absolute classic from the looks of it. Chandler was up by 21. Hamilton rallied. Those two teams plus Basha and then defending state champs Peoria Liberty got the top 4 seeds. So they all get a bye weekend, but there's going to be some really good playoffs here in Arizona this weekend. And then as you and I discussed last week, I get to hit the road and get to do something that you've been doing for the last few years. And I get to Rice-Eccles Stadium for also shout out my neighbor, JJ, who's watching the show. I'm heading out to Salt Lake City to go watch some really, really intriguing games. I was doing some kind of recon early on, and as much of a disappointment, we'll talk about this on our recruiting update, that Davis is out, losing the number 1 player in the state in 27 in Bodie Sparrow, and then the quarterback Tradon Bessinger. We'll get to see Lone Peak and their talent. There is a commit in these next 6 games that I'll be going to. We have an SEC commit, 2 of them, in fact, Hilamu Kasonga and Taden Kava. Texas A&M and Alabama, 2 top 4 teams in the country right there. We've got a Big Ten commit in Easton Tafa. And I'm probably going to miss some names. So that's a Big Ten commit. We got a Big 12 commit in a number of commits going to BYU and Utah, Bob Mulatalu, Jaron and Keenan Pula, Lopeti Moala, Kawe Akana. I'm missing
Isa Naliai
going to Utah. We've got ACC commits in Kai Meza, who just announced for Cal. We've got a number of Pac-12 commits, guys that are headed to Utah State, Mountain West commits. as well. And then that doesn't even take into account all the 27s and the 28s that we're going to get to see. You get the 3 really talented offensive linemen from Orem in the 28 class. We got Crew Jones, who's the number 2 player in the state, the top defensive recruit in 2027, who is actually headed to Tennessee this weekend for a visit after. We got Major Stokes, who's a top 5 player in the 2028 class down there in Southern Utah. So I can see why you always made this a priority to get to. And, what a concept, having the 6A, 5A, and 4A semifinals in one spot over a 2-day span. And, a lot of talent. Every game has at least one Power 4 recruit or commit in the game. So definitely going to be worthwhile to get out there to Salt Lake City.
A lot of talent. I think a lot of states could learn from what Utah has been doing the last few years to get 6 games in the same place across 2 days, 3 on the first day, 3 on the second day, all back to back to back. And they just do it right. I think it's a great spotlight and a great platform. Now, just obviously we're keeping away even like our own selfish views, because I don't want to be driving from place to place to go see players. But what a cool concept to get these players to play in probably the biggest football. I mean, not BYU fans look away or close your ears, but yeah, maybe the biggest football venue in the state. And you don't even have to make it to the state championship game to be able to play. Like, that's a great reward, a great prize. All your games are televised on TV up and down the state. You can watch them. And like you said, Huff, it's just star-studded, and you get some of these big moments. Last year, if you go back and do the research, Huff, like every game was a nail-biter. Mm-hmm. Like every game came down to the final drive. And that's because it means so much that these players want to be back the following week for the state championship games. And they already got a taste of what it's like to play inside Rice Eccles. They want to be back the following week. And it's really cool. It's a great setup. And I hope we get to see that a little bit more from other states, not only on the West Coast, but in other parts of the country. I know Texas does something very similar, where they kind of drag it out all week, and a lot of the teams make it out to the same venue. That's a really cool kind of road and a pathway to pave for some of these players to try to get somewhere. I want to say that, like, the way that is set up allows for the consumption to be at its peak, right? Like, everyone wins, whether that's the fan that just wants to go and watch high school football, whether it's the players and the teams that actually want to be involved in a game like that. It elevates the level. It puts a spotlight on kind of the whole process. It's a top-notch event. I'm glad that you're going to be able to experience it. I think, like I said, you have to map out your meals, right? Because there's no downtime. Like, because when the game is over, you want to start taking photos of like the next guys, or trying to figure out who's hurt or who's not playing, or, doing your reporting duties. But yeah, just make sure you feed yourself well. I think that would be my biggest. I'm having some FOMO now that you're talking about it.
Blair, you've been on the road with me enough over the years to know that is one thing that I do not take lightly. That is a responsibility that I make sure I am up to task on. And again, I was telling, when I was in Colorado a couple weeks ago, I stopped by Valor Christian, and Mike Sanford is the head coach there. And we were talking about a time when he was a running backs coach at Stanford. We went to go watch Valor Christian. And early in the day, we went and watched Ralston Valley. It was a beautiful sunny day in Denver, and I wore a sweatshirt and shorts, thinking it was going to be a sunny day. When that sun went down, I froze. So between kickoff and warm-ups, I drove to Dick's to go get a pair of pants to wear over that. Now when I go to events, I don't care if it's sunny, rainy, or anything in between. I'm packing for all seasons. I see it's going to be like in the 60s on Friday, but that could be a lie. I lived in Washington long enough to know that you can't trust the weather. But I'll be prepared, because John Wooden said, failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
John Wooden, pyramid of success. We need a printout somewhere, because I think that you could learn a lot from that. Let's look ahead, Huff, or let's look back. Actually, you mentioned Tradon Bessinger and his commitment to Iowa. that's something that we tracked this whole week. It was a little bit of a surprise because he had scheduled an official visit to BYU for this weekend, but he decides to shut down his process basically in the minutes leading up to the Hawkeyes hosting Oregon. He comes off the board, and what a recruiting victory that is for them to land a quarterback of his caliber over 4,500 passing yards as a senior this year, over 50 touchdown passes. A basketball player who's also showing some of his athleticism on the football field and the way he operates behind center. I really like that pickup. He told me that he hopes to bring change to that Iowa offense, and I took that as like I don't want to hand the ball off, right? Like I want to air it out like I've been doing at the high school level. And then UCLA also making some noise on the recruiting trail, Huff, who they were involved with Bessinger, and it sounded like he wanted to wait to see what they would do at the coaching position, but they're still kind of churning along.
Yeah, they had 3 official visitors over the weekend, one that's committed to San Diego State and Major Pride, who was actually trying to get his good friend Kenny Moore to flip to San Diego State right on the firing of Deshaun Foster. And it might be going the other way with Major Pride taking an official to UCLA this weekend. Ammon Alexander out of Queen Creek, Benjamin Franklin was also there. But then the really intriguing one is a guy named Joel Quessier, who was originally from Dusseldorf, Germany, and is now playing at the NFL Academy in London. UCLA had offered him in October and then got him in for an official visit this weekend. Very intriguing player. NFL Academy has played some of the top programs in the United States. Last year, they played De La Salle out in England. This year, they played, I believe, St. Thomas Aquinas, and I want to say IMG as well, but brought him in for a visit. So, UCLA does not have a coach. As a report broken by Bruin Report online over the weekend, they may not have a venue next year, or they may have 2 venues to play in. It's just a matter of which one they're going to pick. But Quessier actually, interestingly enough, said that he could not believe the atmosphere and the energy at the Rose Bowl and thought it was a crazy place. And then a day later, word breaks out that UCLA may be leaving the Rose Bowl. So UCLA doesn't have a coach. They don't necessarily know who's going to be in charge of their program, but they may go across the pond, as they say, to get another commit in this class, which could be their 4th in the cycle since the firing of Deshaun Foster. And that doesn't even take into account the 2 that they were able to get back in the fold, or I believe 3 at this point, Matthew Musau, Anthony Jones, and I feel like I'm missing somebody, though you were able to touch base with Cooper Jaworski, who may be joining those 2 in rejoining the fold. Yeah.
To be fair, Nebraska fans did make the Rose Bowl a crazy place.
Sure.
From what we could gather on TV. And hey, like maybe he's been to some of these soccer matches in Europe, right? That only get like 18,000 people in some of these venues. So maybe it was, to see 40,000 is probably mind numbing for a player of where he's coming from. Cooper Jaworski, things are trending well there, I think, for the Bruins to eventually get him back on board. If I think he's kind of staying patient, seeing what else happens here in the next 3 weeks, wants to get a clear picture of like Andy Kwan, the offensive line coach, or whether or not he's still going to be there. San Diego State's involved, UNLV, still trying to figure out if Auburn's going to get him back on a visit, but they're also looking for the head coach. So I would kind of think that UCLA should feel good about Cooper Jaworski, who was one of the top centers in the country. There was a decommitment, Huff, in the 2027 class. Taven Epps, he's an elite linebacker from Tustin. He decommitted from Texas, came off the board to the Longhorns. He became Texas's first commitment in 27, but he has been taking visits all over the map in recent weeks, made it out to Notre Dame and North Carolina and Oklahoma, USC, Georgia, Alabama, a number of places. It's hard to find a player that's been as busy on the recruiting trail as Taven Epps has this year. Officially reopens his process. He told me, he probably he didn't take enough time to make that decision. He called himself young at the time, which, is kind of funny to hear junior in high school talk about how he was too young to make that choice initially, but he commits to the Longhorns early, now back on the map. Sounds like Oklahoma is having a really good a really good impression there and making a dent in that recruitment. I think he wants to take his time, though. He wants to take some visits later this season, early in 2026, and then possibly take some officials. I wouldn't rule out an early commitment because he's already committed once, and he's not young anymore. So this is a player who I think could eventually come off the board. And if he did so before official visits, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. Now, another player, a teammate of his at Tustin, who will be coming off the board this week, is Khalil Terry, the top 24/7 safety, 4-star prospect, a versatile defensive back in place of nickel, has played corner, has the ability to play both safety positions, a really good tackler, competitive. I think checks a ton of boxes and competes at a high level, no matter whether it's on Fridays or on Saturdays during the 7-on-7 circuit. Huff, you've been able to see Terry a number of times as well, and he always wants to match up against the best receiver on the other side, which is, again, one of those things that we look for when we're going out to evaluate and to scout these players, because we want the guys that want to match up against the guys. And Khalil Terry has never really ducked that. And so that's very admirable, especially when 7-on-7 is more of a passing league environment, right? Where it's a lot easier for the receivers to get open. There's no physical contact. There's no tackling that, you can kind of slip by. But I think Khalil Terry embraces that. And so he's coming off the board. The announcement will be live at around 10:30 Pacific on Wednesday, November 12th, on the CBS Sports College Football YouTube channel. Notre Dame just got a visit from Khalil Terry this past weekend. He was in South Bend for the Navy game. The Irish instantly become the favorite there. If you're setting a commitment date fresh off a visit, it should be pretty good news for the Fighting Irish. I know USC has been involved for several months. I know he liked Oklahoma. I know he liked Tennessee, a few other schools like North Carolina, who has the deep connections with Armand Hawkins. But I think that the Fighting Irish and kind of what Marcus Freeman was able to sell this past weekend was maybe just too much for Khalil Terry to say no to. I mean, right now you don't ever blame a kid or you never in a way kind of like look down on like the decision to leave the West Coast to go play for Notre Dame, especially with what they do in the secondary, what they do on the defensive side of the ball, everything that comes with being a Notre Dame football player. And I think that's a really good selling point. So I like the Fighting Irish heading into that announcement. Remember, it's live on the CBS Sports College Football YouTube channel from Tustin. And a birdie told me that since I'm not in Salt Lake City with you, Huff, having my margarita at Monarca, that I'm probably going to be in Tustin to broadcast this commitment, Khalil Terry.
I will pour one out for you at Level Crossing Brewing to, tip the absence of you in Utah.
Yeah, so that'll be fun. We're going to be back next week. We're going to discuss that Utah trip. I'm going to have a blast. I'm probably setting aside 30 minutes to just pick your brain on what Salt Lake City was like, what the Rice-Eccles environment was like, whether or not you packed the hand warmers that I told you to pack. To me, a lot of fun. Anything else, Huff, before we go?
The only thing that I would really say is that, again, like I said, we're in that 3-week period here. I think we got to keep our eye, there's going to be some interesting things that'll happen in recruiting in the next few weeks, because you've got a couple of schools that need to make a head coaching hire. Obviously, UCLA is the most high profile out west, but you've got Colorado State, you've got Oregon State that are going to be needing to name a coach. You might have the domino effect, and to see, does that cause any last minute things to change? We saw it last year. There was not a crazy amount of flips, but we did have the all-timer on signing day when Jaron Calves-Longopolitelli, who 24/7 named the National True Freshman of the Week for the second time. A nice shout out from Jaron to 24/7 for that honor. On signing day, flipped to Oregon, and then ultimately ended up back shortly after the Rose Bowl, which kind of goes with the thing we were talking about earlier. But I'll be interested in seeing if anything changes in these next couple of weeks, as we may see some dominoes fall recruiting wise. There's also the schools that have coaches that maybe are going to be desired by other programs. We saw the rumors that were flying out about Lincoln Riley at LSU. I don't buy those. Jed Fish's name, he kind of firmly put his foot down on Monday. But with the way coaching carousel has gone, sometimes it may be better to get ahead of the mob, or maybe it's better to go where there's a better payday. So these next 3 weeks will not be as intriguing in the sense that we don't have a lot of guys that are still ready to make a decision. It's what could the collateral damage effect be of coaching changes? So I'm keeping my eye on there, and if that expedites some schools' hiring of a head coach.
Yep, a lot to track. Things are getting juicy. Then we're going to put up the Christmas tree a little early this year, just because Thanksgiving is so late in November. You feel like you're not getting bang for your buck. Like, why would I put that much effort in putting the lights up and the tree, and if we're just gonna have to tear it down so quickly? So I think we're gonna be that early couple this year, Huff. What do you think?
Dude, we've been doing that since my daughter passed away. She loved Christmas, so we are usually around the 10th or the 11th of November. Those Christmas tree decorations come up.
Well, today's the 11th, Huff. Today you gotta get your, before you go to Salt Lake City. I want to see a tree pick.
I may or may not be using the holiday that it is today to take my daughter and my wife to go get our Christmas tree. And also, to me, if SiriusXM starts playing Christmas music on Holly, then it's Christmas season.
All right. You can go get a red cup too at Starbucks. We just shout out all the coffee places.
All the coffee places
on this podcast. Mm-hmm. Red Cup Day, I think Thursday. My son's already clamoring for it. Because he loves these red cups that we have from last year.
All the psychotic people that get in line at 4 a.m. to get their limited edition ornament.
That'll be us probably at some point. So
no judgment.
I wanted again to remind our listeners that today's show was sponsored by the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation. We're bringing hope, funding research, and fighting for a cure for childhood brain cancer. Learn more at averystrongdipg.org. For Brandon Huffman, I'm Blair Angulo. Thank you so much for tuning into this edition of the West of the Rest podcast. Huff, pack your jacket.
Hand warmers are packed.